how government can cut its spending and how we can make sure that a little bit more goes round and that folks will not have to suffer as much as they are today is what we'll be having this hour. And as we do that, a friend of ours is in the studio this morning. Dr. Barrack Muluka is Strategic Communications Advisor, and he's here with us this morning. Barrack, it is good to see you.
Always a very great pleasure to see you, Ndo, City. And of course, Eric is in the habit of running away whenever he hears that I'm coming.
You know,
telling that is a vacation.
You've noted.
Yes.
So we must find a way to tie the gentleman down.
Okay.
The next time you're coming.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good to have you. City has a long in the tooth proverb from Uganda today.
Very good. Let's hear it.
This is our final proverb from the country of Uganda. What you have not, let me say it again.
Okay.
What you have not yet got in your possession, do not consider as yours. Full stop. That's part one. Second part. They took back the bananas you had stolen at night.
Aha. So they probably should have been stolen during the day.
then they'd be yours?
They would not have been taken away. They would have remained in your possession.
I think if you had taken them during the day, you should have consumed them as well.
That's right. You'd have had them for dinner.
You see, you have to attempt to understand that world, that cosmology. And it comes all the way to Western Kenya. Now, about bananas that you have in your possession. The tradition is that if you should be walking by, maybe during the day, perhaps even the night, and should you feel hungry, you can actually get into anyone's plantation, take some of the bananas,
and eat,
and leave there whatever you are not able to eat.
Mm-hmm.
If you take it away, then you are considered to have stolen, and they will take it back. Okay? So, sit down.
You've contextualized. You eat, you're allowed to eat it.
Yes.
But not to carry
Not to carry it.
Okay.
And it's a very African thing. African hospitality.
Eat and have your fill.
That's it.
Yeah.
But do not carry.
And then you see, if we behave that way, there's no wastage because we move away from primitive accumulation. One of the biggest challenges about us and around us is what Marx and Engels in their day called primitive accumulation, that you are gathering and assembling and stocking and storing away things that you will never have any use for. Because, let's face it, you can only do one plate at a time. It doesn't matter how much you have, the rest belongs to other people. It's not yours. You're hoarding.
It's a biblical theory as well, isn't it? Do not gather up for yourselves in barns and etc. etc. Right.
Yes, and you remember the rich fool, the one who said, now
my heart,
I'm going to expand my stores and pile there as much as possible and say to my soul, soul, now eat to your satisfaction and fulfillment and rest.
Okay. Kenyans are not eating to their satisfaction and fulfillment and rest, Barrack. And there's been a lot of fear. There's been consternation. There's been anger. But I think above and beyond all of that, there's been fear in terms of then what tomorrow holds for Kenya. And one of the fingers that has been pointed right at government in terms of how much they've been spending. Rather, how much government has been spending. I'm not going to say they, because, we've often said that government is collective, isn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Let's look at government expenditure in Kenya. It stood at 2.53 trillion shillings. That's around $17.41 billion from July 2022 to May 2023. In the fiscal year 2021-2022, government spending in Kenya totaled 3.02 trillion shillings. The amount consisted of interest payments, number 1. Number 2, salaries and wages. Number 3, pensions, payments for maintenance. And number 4, operations. Expenditures incurred on projects were also included. It's a lot of money in terms of what has been spent. We've seen a couple of things happen in the recent days, and we do not know if it was falling to pressure. But then the president did come out very clearly and said, look, across the ministries, let's have a 10% reduction in how much we spend, because this cannot be. A week or so before that, we did see the huge amounts of money that was being spent on travel by the executive, travel by ministries. And the question is, was this all necessary? Is it possible to save the situation by a significant reduction in the amount of money that government is spending? I think that's the question over us right now, Barrack.
Thank you, Ndu. I see that you fire through multiple barrels. I will attempt to isolate them and address them one at a time to the best of my ability. But first, let me begin by making a confession, a disclaimer.
Okay.
I'm not an expert on matters of the economy, but a lot of these things are commonsensical, and therefore my approach is going to be a common sense based approach, and also as a Kenyan, and therefore make my contribution this morning as any citizen of this country should do, because they feel the pinch as well. You have given us, Ndu, the expenditure. What is missing, of course, is the other entry, because in finance, the experts would talk about a double entry, and you begin by showing us the income, then you can show us the expenditure, and at the end of it we have the balance sheet. So your sheet is not balanced. It has got only one leg.
I don't think the government sheet is balanced either.
I don't know. I don't have the facts. But I think that it behooves us to be able to have the two entries, credit and debit. And therefore, we are able to talk about the bottom line in a very meaningful way. But more frontally, Ndu and my brother City, when you are in a hole, they say, you discover you are in a hole as in H-O, not as in H-A, you decide that you must stop digging. If you do not stop digging, we probably are going to entire you in that hole. And therefore, I would understand the context within which the President, His Excellency Dr. William Ruto, and the Head of Public Service, HOPS,
Right.
It's called HOPS. What they are doing springs from the consideration that the country is in a hole, and therefore you have got to stop digging. Is that enough?
To stop digging?
To stop digging, or even just the extent that has been defined, that we're going to stop or to control foreign travels, excursions into other people's spaces, and the expenses that go with those excursions, and the rationalization of those excursions. Of course, it speaks to the notion of enough or enoughness, adequacy. What does it mean when we say that it's enough? That we have done all that is adequate, all that is sufficient, and perhaps we can now stop there, that there's nothing left to be done. I don't think that is the case. there's always a scope for a lot more to be done. And in fact, that scope is much bigger, wider, and broader. And if we are saying that what the president and the head of public service are saying is the first aid intervention, then we must now start going beyond that and diagnosing the problem a lot more. You see, if you get to the casualty in a hospital environment and you are bleeding, the first thing they do is to attempt to stop the bleeding. But then they must take you through the triage, they must do proper diagnosis, and they must eventually find and prescribe a regime that is going to deal with your case. And I think that a lot more remains to be done, that is not just in the space of government, that starts touching on all of us. If you look at cost, and I said this was going to be a commonsensical approach.
Sure.
Travel, movement, bring it home. Let's look at the way we are cruising on the roads. Let us look at the kind of motor vehicular kind of engagement. How many vehicles of what size for how many persons?
By whom, Barrack? The government?
Yeah, I'll start from government.
Okay.
And then I'll move away from government, because in the end, it is about the resources that are available and how we are putting those resources to use. Within government, we saw, for example, that when Uhuru Kenyatta was Minister for Finance at some point, I think 2008, 2009, and he issued this directive that now we would only use vehicles of up to a certain capacity. Of course, it was flouted. It didn't last. But we need to get into that space and ask ourselves, do we really need the vehicles of this kind of capacity that we use in government? Do we need to have an individual like City Muga here having 5 or 6 of them in his entourage, and Barrack perhaps having 8 or 9 or 10? We must start from that space. Yeah, and having delimited those ones, we must also recognize that it goes into the space of what everybody else has. There have been countries here, Singapore, which is cited a lot of times as the model, the role model, where Lee Kuan Yew at some point said, now we are going to restrict our motor vehicle use in this country to such and such capacity, because we have got to ask ourselves where the fuel is going. The size of government. Are we willing to look at the size of government city in this country? And the size of government has been a problem for decades. If you look at the economic surveys, over the decades, right from when we still had President Moi here, through President Kibaki, President Uhuru Kenyatta, and now President William Ruto, expenditure on development has never been above 15%.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, it's played at the mouth of 11 and 12%.
11, 12%. The rest is recurrent. We need to ask recurring so that it then supports what? Now we are in space where we brought another layer on board called devolved government. When we are looking at government expenditure, we fall short of being accused of being myopic if we do not look at the 48 counties when they are doing the devolution conference, where my brother Eric was the other day. They talk about 48 governments, and they put it there in screaming letters, 48 governments. In other words, they are talking about the 47 counties plus one, the national government. And the consumption. When you get to county government, it's like you've been given free license to do howsoever you wish. Nairobi is proposing to buy motorboats.
Is that?
Well, okay, we don't know
I
if
saw that, but I'm not.
we're not quite sure if that's the thing.
But anyway, the point you make is a valid one.
Even if we say motorboats only from a figurative perspective,
yes,
that's how they are going to deal with El Nino. We are seeing the attitude. The attitude is that the public coffers are there to be tapped, to be exploited. President Nyerere used to say Mali ya Umma. And some people will ask you, Mali ya Umma. Someone who said it does not belong to our mothers. and because it does not belong to our mothers, it can be spent howsoever those who are in those places want. Today is Friday. And in the counties across the country, without exception, when they say, thank God, it's Friday. They're saying, Chief of Staff, today I want 600,000. I want 1 million. I've got a funeral. I've got 4 funerals. I've got I don't know how many weddings. I've got so many harambes. These are things that we have got to be very frank about.
So I hear,
if we have been having a national dialogue somewhere, have we been talking about how we are going to cut down?
So then I hear what you're saying is that there is an absolute need to cut down. And you've talked about 3 areas here. Number one,
and there's a 4th one which I'll come to.
Okay, so let me say those 3 that you so you talk about travel. It is not necessary, number one, to have these what have been so, affectionately referred to as guzzlers. We don't need to have them in the numbers in which we do. We see the reduction of that. We will see a reduction in costs. The travel, all over the world to get certain things done doesn't need to be as frequent or as expensive as it is. We're also talking about for the 47 different county governments, things are happening outside of development that perhaps need to be checked. And if we see a reduction in those things, we'll see that you could mop up some more funds for you to do have a lot more development take place. Is that what you're saying?
Can I ask a question, even as Barrack thinks about this? You see, the travel, the guzzlers, the huge entourages, in terms of what they cost, the buying of it, the cost of the travel, what really is the problem there? Yes, there is a cost attached to it, but in terms of a national budget, how significant is it? Number one. Number two, is it the optics that we find offensive? Because amidst this glaring poverty and a downward spiraling state of despondency among very many citizens, are we saying that this manifestation of this very conspicuous consumption is what we find abhorrent, is what we find detestable?
I consider that it is all that rolled into one. I consider that when you look at some of the counties, some of the reports that we saw as recently as 3-4 weeks ago, had spent only up to 2% on development.
Yeah.
If you are spending 2% on development and 98%
on the current
expenditure,
how do you just begin to justify your existence? We are spending 98% on this county so that you give us what in return? The 2% is a pittance. yeah, you might as well just pack up and go.
It's actually an insult.
Yeah, it actually is. Stay with it. Then, yeah.
And the big tragedy is even that we are contemplating the possibility that we could have more counties, and in an environment that has got very little accountability. The kind of focus that we train on the national government, and which is correct, that we must focus on the national government because it's where most of this happens, nonetheless gives the counties an opportunity to run away from surveillance. Later on, you start seeing new generals arriving after the old sheriffs have gone, and then you start hearing that there are hundreds of millions of shillings under probe that were probably not accounted for by the ancient regime. Is it possible that we could stop that hemorrhage in good time when it really matters? Because the other pedestal then colleagues is the pedestal of malfeasance in government, a question of corruption,
right?
Yeah, which again we must face frontally. And when we talk about corruption, it takes two to tango. I said at the outset that eventually it is all of us.
Barrack, you were talking about corruption as one of those issues. And if we know that the bleed from corruption then is so high, that then manifests itself in some of these things that we see, purchase of vehicles, and then it's put on some paper somewhere. It's Friday. That example that you gave, it is Friday and it's going into the weekend. I need a couple of cars to do 1, 2, 3. Where does that money come from? Who uses it? Tenders, where we've heard that there are things like budgeted corruption. Even at the beginning of the project, it is known, it is understood where this money is going to go. Now, how then do you deal with that? Unless you have a desire to deal with corruption, it is going to be the perennial monkey on the back, is it not?
Corruption, spending, government spending, Kenyan spending. Yeah? Because what are we spending on? It's coming from a common basket. At the end of the day, when we talk about GDP, it's not going to matter whether it is spending in government, by government. It is spending by ourselves as an entire polity. What are we spending on? There is always this tendency to look within that corner and say there's government sitting there. What are they spending? You recall that some years back they used to have some posters against every switch in the office, public, private, where they would say switch off lonely lights.
Yeah.
Because the totality of this has an impact on the overall situation in the national economy. So we have got to look at that spending. We have got to look at attitude. Our attitude, what is our philosophy about wealth, about what City Muga calls conspicuous consumption? And I would dare add a descriptor, another descriptor, and say unashamedly conspicuous consumption. That if you do not appear to consume in a certain way that is making a very big statement, a very big pronouncement about yourself, your wherewithal, then this society laughs at you. That if I go into government, and people will tell me, Barrack, if you leave that place when you are still a poor man, then we will all laugh at you. And they laugh at you because you've come back a poor man. Joshua Ngatia was a minister for health. God rest his soul in eternal peace. And the people of Malaba were laughing at him, saying, look at this one. He was on the gravy train and he came back without anything. We condemn corruption, but seem to have reconciled ourselves to the fact that some people within certain echelons of power must access that which does not belong to them. In economics, they talk about prebendalism, a state in which the gains of corruption are part of the benefits that are expected to flow your way when you occupy a certain office. So you wake up in the morning to go there not to work, but to do deals at an inflated rate,
right.
Sometimes in non-existent manners, that there are supplies where there have been none, that we saw in the KEMSA days. And it's always possible that there could be another KEMSA happening. When I hear about the Lobengula kind of gunboat on the Nairobi River. You remember Chief...
I remember him very well.
Lobengula.
Oh, yes, the South African.
South Africa.
I remember him very, very well.
And the Belly Land, and they
Yes.
were talking of a gunboat on the Zambezi River, which was one of the hopeless, useless things that you signed up with the Cecil Rhodes in the Rad and Moffat concessions. Then you have a whiff of scandal. But we don't seem to mind, provided that that comes to us. President Mwai Kibaki had this dictum about a working nation. How much respect and love do we also have for work? Do we go out to work? And
Barrack, is there, and I think of the things that you speak, is there a direct relation or the direct connection between this corruption, which we know is happening, we know that there's a bleed, and if that were to be plugged at its source, would we then be able to see that, okay, the government spending is happening, but it's not a dent really in how things are, the travel, the vehicles, etc., etc. But if you're able to plug the holes on corruption, as you say, because hundreds of millions of shillings being lost on a daily basis, can that be a big enough hole for us to say it is absolutely imperative that then you do something about it?
I'm asking the question again, plug the hole. Is there an appetite for it? Because what we see is an appetite for the complete opposite, make the hole wider. The question you asked early on, the why, it's the question you must constantly ask. Why? Now, theories and ideas on these subjects abound. There's no question about it. But ask yourself a simple question. What is it that makes human beings halt and pause? What is it that stops one on one's tracks and makes them consider a situation? Is it when you are provided with an abundance of enablers, a situation which allows you to willy-nilly do exactly what you like, or one which has dire, negative, if not dire consequences to yourself, which when upon attaining what you wanted, alongside it, there's this package that comes with it of the consequences. And and you have in turn witnessed and seen those consequences. Now, of the two scenarios, which one do you think will thrive? Because if we argue that leadership is supposed to lead, hence the term leadership, then we could argue we are being led. Because if you have a leadership, whether it's in the government, whether it's a political leadership, whose appetite for the very thing we're discussing seems to grow by the day, they are leading. Now, when they lead, what do you think will happen? People will follow.
I think the level of consumption, what it is that people are eating, is only the tip of the iceberg. We started off with the bananas, the proverb from Uganda. We spoke about that which you possess. And we spoke about the possibility that you could eat within the plantation and eat what is enough and go away, leave the rest there because it does not belong to you. It is the Gandhian expression about there being sufficient resources to meet everyone's need, but never being there enough resources to address everyone's greed. And this element of greed that then makes government not a service sector, because government is supposed to be a facilitator of an environment in which we create jobs and generate wealth. And there's the dignity of labor. That if you go out and do a decent day's job, you also take home a decent wage. Hence the expression within the national anthem, which we sometimes have referred to as the Kenyan dream, that the fruit of our labor shall fill every heart with thanksgiving. But government, as we know it in Kenya today, is a gravy train. Everyone wants to become a member of parliament. That is government. Because when we talk about the spending in government, we must also ask how much is being spent in parliament or by parliament. These foreign travels, how much has parliament spent? Government is the county assembly. Every young person today wants to become a member of the county assembly.
In order to eat, from what you're saying. So, Barrack, I think this is the question here, is that if we saw a reduction in some of these things, would we see a better situation? What would be here today when we are saying it would be absolutely necessary for you to say, can there be a directive, cut the spending? The 10% that President Ruto suggested, or rather didn't suggest, directed, be implemented in terms of cutting spending. Is that something more along the lines of what we should be seeing today in order to relieve the situation?
It will not help us, Ndu. That is a band-aid solution to a cancerous problem. We need to dismantle the systems completely, the structure, the superstructure, the substructure. We need to cut down the counties from 47, perhaps to 12, perhaps to 8.
Go back to what it was before, where you had 8 regions.
Before you have 8 regions. Show me which people, whether they are going to be the ones from Manyudia, where I come from, who are going to accept that their county of Kakamega is merged with Bungoma, with Busia, or with maybe Siaya, and that it becomes one county, that we cut down the number of elected leaders within the county assembly, that we look at the seats once again in the National Assembly and the Senate, and from the nearly 400 seats, we come down to about 70 or 80, which is what a country of our kind of size and economy needs. Instead, we are talking about expanding. And people are saying, yes, here in Korea, we need ours. Even in Manyudia, we are saying, yes, we need our own county here.
But if I would prefer, I would say, for example, look at the stories that have come out of Turkana, for example, and the amount of money that has been pumped into a particular county, and then there's nothing to show for it. For me, have as many counties as you want, but at the end of the day, shouldn't the demand be that the implementation of development that we talk about actually be followed? That people know for a fact today that if there is no deterrent measure, for you to take county funds, for example, that were meant for development and do something otherwise with them, if there is no action that would then serve as deterrent for anybody else, it's bad manners that's being, multiplied across all levels. It's going from the top to the bottom. It's going from the bottom to the top. We just said now, not more than 12% from expenditure has gone towards development. We've seen that year on year. And here we are saying that, it doesn't matter if you have 100 counties in Kenya. If people have not accepted that there's certain behavior which will not be accepted and that will be punished if you bring it around, it won't make a difference. You can have 8, it'll be the same thing. You can have 100, it'll be the same thing.
Who will bail this cat?
And this is the question, I think. Who is going to be the one who stands up and says, actually, I will not accept this kind of irresponsibility when it comes to government funding?
You know,
I think that is it.
Ignorance is a terrible thing. It's a really, really terrible thing. You see, it's like our understanding of devolution began and ended with the counties. That's not it. That's not it. You see, if you look at even our constitution, the whole idea of devolution was to ensure that when you start with counties, you break down units into sub-counties. We already had constituencies. We already had wards. But if you're talking about administrative structures that you can have municipalities, you can have cities. The Constitution provides for it. The only problem that we see is when you have these bodies, they are not made autonomous. They should be autonomous. If you look at a place like Nairobi, a place like Langata ought to be a city. If you look at just the issue of the population that is required for an entity to be referred to as a city, 250,000 I think is the benchmark. I'm simply saying this. Right now, if I look at Nairobi where we live, Sakaja or any other governor who comes along cannot manage this county the way it's currently managed. You can't. You will have no idea what's happening in most parts of this county. Now, devolution taken to its logical conclusion would have guaranteed that within this so-called county, there are units that actually can govern themselves. Think of any area of Nairobi and ask yourself, if you created a municipality, Sakaja talked of boroughs, create a municipality, create a city, given the population, and give them the same autonomy as you would in the county, meaning devolve it fully.
That city,
yes.
That's going to be autonomy to it, unhinged, without anyone. You see, Nairobi is not even, strictly speaking, what you would seriously call a city. It's just a big town. Yeah.
I'm looking at the definition as is in the Constitution and what it is. For instance, why was Nakuru made a city? There are specific conditions that must be met before an entity becomes a city.
Yeah,
that's really what I'm saying.
When you lower the bar, of course.
Actually, no, Barrack, it's not lowering the bar. It's what we have. It's not something that I have cobbled up. It's what we actually have.
It is what we have,
yes.
Based on the bar that we have put there for us.
Yes.
Ourselves have seen that Eldoret is about to become a city, in spite of all the inconvenience of traversing. Just try getting across Eldoret from Nakuru, going towards Kitale, just that little artery there, and see what happens. Just go to that town in the night near the market and see how many rats are cutting across the streets. Our friend Albert Camus of the Plague would be shocked at what he would see, or Gabriela Marcia of Love in the season of cholera. They would be shocked. We need to raise the bar of public expectation, the bar of accountability, and lower completely the bar of tolerance.
How will that be done, Barrack? I need you to tell me who is this person who fell the cat.
We made some movement in the past. Because even as we talk about these things, we must recognize that we have made some movement as a country. The fact that we can even assemble around these instruments and speak the way we are doing, it was not always like this. That space was never there. And the effort came largely from civil society. It came from the academy, and it came from the shrine. What happened was that in 2002, when the spaces were opening up, civil society was swallowed up. Yeah, the people who had been in civil society got in and
got in the government.
In government,
yes,
and then we recognized that perhaps they were also talking out of a certain sense of relative deprivation. They were just not happy that they were not the ones who were doing what those who are in the house were doing. And hence, when they got there, we started hearing of things like, it is now our turn to eat.
We had all sorts of things.
And
yes.
we must move away. And I think civil society must regenerate itself, because somebody must hold government to account. And this is difficult, to hold government to account, when even the political opposition on day 2, the morning after creation of government, with apologies to Chinua Achebe, want to become part of government. The opposition chiefs start talking of something called inclusivity. And the inclusivity they're talking about is that they also want to be part of the tenders.
Do you think that perhaps a Westminster model of government would introduce some form of inclusivity?
Inclusivity in what city? That is the question.
You see,
inclusivity on the gravy train.
Is inclusivity? Is it a framework, a structure? Or is it a state of mind? You see,
you are already included.
Actually,
in the polity.
No, maybe I should ask. Why do people feel excluded?
When you are in the opposition, you are already included in the polity. Yeah, with your role clearly defined as checking the government
as the minority
of the day and as the minority. But when you start saying that open up space also, we want to be in that chamber.
So you're arguing that you want a different system of government as opposed to the one we have, isn't it?
It's not that city. I think the eating will go on. You know, we started here in Kenya in 1963 with that system that you talk about. Jomo Kenyatta was the prime minister.
He was.
On the basis of the fact that his party, KANU, won the majority
precisely
of the
and we even had a lower
seats.
and an upper house.
Yeah, we had a lower and upper house.
Yes.
When they got inside there, they changed the law, and Jomo Kenyatta became the first president of Kenya without being elected to that position of...
was he ever elected?
Yes, he was. In 1969, he was elected.
He was elected.
And in 1974...
He was elected.
He was elected because the process...
The process was you were elected as a member of parliament first, isn't it?
Was there, yes. He was elected...
as member of parliament for Gatundu.
But he was also elected as president, yeah, in 1969.
And did anyone else vie for that position?
Yes, my father... ran against my father. You can go and check in the National Archives.
In
1962, but the Electoral Commission and the police, they stopped him from presenting
his papers.
Okay.
Yeah, and until around midday.
When the time had expired.
Yeah, and he's there. Emmanuelia is aged 90-something. This is a historical fact. And the statement was that if we allow him to run unopposed, then we are going to open the doors to dictatorship. But that is for some other day. The issue is this, ladies and gentlemen, and the viewers and listeners, that the change that we want, the constitutionalism, the reforms, must be
the lack
found
of waste of public
within
resources
ourselves, because we have got a very high degree of toleration, and we see these things with eyes askance. Depending on who it is that is doing that which is wrong, we look the other side. So it doesn't matter whether it's a presidential system, it's a parliamentary system. already in 1965, 1964, corruption was well and healthy. We can talk about the maize scandals during the polling days.
Yes.
We can talk
it is
about...
actually recorded as the first major scandal that this country actually ever had.
Our time is running out, literally. But one thing that I'm hearing is that Kenyans then need to be actively involved in talking about this corruption thing, and that is what is going to bring down this wastage that we see.
And to feel ashamed of certain individuals who are thieves, to ostracize them, to refrain from deodorizing theft and calling it corruption.
Okay.
Because a thief is a thief. To stop feeling like we want to associate ourselves with honorable criminals. You know, when you think about a thief, you think about a fellow in rags. I invite everyone to read Ngugi wa Thiong'o's Devil on the Cross.
Could be in a suit and a tie.
And in a
Barrack.
motorcade, and living in suburbia.
Thank you.
And they are honorable criminals.
Barrack, thank you for being here this morning. Conversations continue.
This is The Situation Room, the only way to start your day.